Her name was Charlotte Reed. But most in the company just called her Chief. For nearly a decade, Charlotte had been the unseen engine behind Orion Core Technologies, a tech giant that prided itself on innovation while silently relying on her to keep its digital backbone intact. At 47, she was precise, understated, always one step ahead, and never the loudest voice in the room, until the system needed saving. Her office on the 21st floor was barely touched by time, polished oak desk, a chess pawn paperweight, and a vintage 1922 Mont Blanc fountain pen that once belonged to her grandfather. The kind of detail that told you she didn't just work here, she built here. That morning, the sun was spilling across the Seattle skyline. Her blouse was crisp, lipstick flawless, and a photo of her son, now stationed overseas, sat near her monitor. Across the screen, the Japanese delegation appeared calm, finalizing an $84 million deal that Charlotte had dragged through fire, politics, earthquakes, audits, over 11 relentless months. And then, in the quiet hum of corporate diplomacy, a message pinged. Subject line: urgent role termination notification. She didn't react, not yet, but something inside her had already begun to fracture. The message sat there, 2 lines: clinical, efficient, soulless. Due to structural realignment, your role has been deemed redundant. Please clear your desk by 5 p.m. today. Charlotte didn't blink. She didn't even move. The call was still live. Mr. Nakamura, calm, articulate, continued outlining the final provisions of the partnership, unaware he was speaking to someone who had just been quietly severed from the very machine she had built. She nodded on cue, her voice steady as she confirmed. We're aligned. I'll send over the final paperwork by end of day. She ended the call. The screen dimmed. The air shifted, like something sacred had just been unplugged. For 11 months, Charlotte had lived inside this deal, breathed it, fought for it. She'd worked through jet lag and boardroom sabotage, through a spring earthquake that threatened to derail production and a security audit that nearly gutted their cloud pipeline. She'd protected the company, kept its architecture intact, and shielded it from collapse more than once. And now, 2 lines, no signature, no warning, no thank you. She finally opened the email fully, half expecting it to vanish, to glitch, to reveal itself as a hoax or a phishing attempt. But it didn't. It was real. And the real part wasn't the firing, it was the message it carried. You were never the story. Just a line of code we can delete when it suits us. Charlotte sat perfectly still, not frozen, calculating. There was a click, subtle, soft, as she reached down to the drawer on her right. She didn't open it, not yet. Her hand simply rested on the brass handle like a surgeon about to begin a long, clean cut. Outside her window, the city spun on, unchanged, unaware. Cars passed. A jogger tied her shoe. Glass buildings reflected a sky that had no idea a storm was gathering behind one woman's eyes. She stood, slowly, picked up 3 things. The Mont Blanc fountain pen, its lacquer faded, its nib still smooth as silk. The photo of her son, taken the summer before he enlisted, his joy still untouched by betrayal. And the stone pawn that had anchored her desk since her first promotion. Then she walked, not rushed, not panicked, with the grace of someone who understood ritual mattered more than reason. She bypassed the elevator, took the hallway to the hidden restroom near the old server closet, quiet, forgotten, shielded. The lights flickered on, automatic, artificial. She looked into the mirror. The reflection didn't flinch. She looked like success, the kind of woman who just closed an 8-figure deal, not someone who'd just been erased. But inside, she was no longer Charlotte Reed, chief architect. She was something else now. Something the company had never accounted for. She pulled out her phone. 5 layers deep, behind a folder labeled innocently as travel receipts, was a terminal, sentinel loop, a silent protocol, deployed 4 years ago, invisible, undetectable, interwoven into every core system she touched since 2019. Not malware, not revenge, a failsafe, a circuit breaker for arrogance. She tapped once, no password prompt, no confirmation screen, just a spinning wheel, then nothing, except something had started. This was no vendetta, this was architecture. Charlotte had learned the truth long ago. At a different company, in a different fight, when she dared speak up against a corrupt CTO scapegoating junior devs after a massive data breach. She'd called it out, on a live mic, with the CTO in the room. By Friday, she'd been relocated to a satellite office in Nebraska. No demotion, no scandal, just quietly erased. She remembered what they'd called her in the internal memo. Doesn't collaborate well across hierarchy. Translation. She sees too much and doesn't pretend not to. From that day, she stopped believing in rescue. She started believing in silence, not as submission, but as precision. Silence, she realized, was a scalpel. And today, it was sharp. Charlotte walked back to her office with no fanfare. The halls buzzed with startup energy, Slack pings, espresso foamers, laughter over memes, but none of it touched her. Inside her office, she began to pack, piece by piece, not rushed. With ceremony, she left the plaques, the excellence in innovation trophies, the leadership cubes, symbols of being useful, never valued. They'd mistaken her silence for submission. What they didn't know was that Sentinel Loop had already replaced 60% of Orion Core's infrastructure. Quietly, patiently, like a second skeleton inside a body too distracted by its own reflection to notice. And now? Now the heartbeat would begin. At first, nothing happened. Charlotte expected that. Sentinel Loop wasn't designed to explode. It was designed to slip, like fog through the cracks of a system already too bloated to notice a shift. But subtle wasn't safe. Not anymore. By the time she reached the lobby, everything still looked the same. Glass doors, receptionist smiling, the building's branded screens rotating stock tickers and buzzwords, synergy, scalability, trust. She nodded to Thomas at the front desk. He nodded back, unaware he'd just watched the soul of the company walk out in silence. It wasn't until Charlotte was 3 blocks away that her phone buzzed. Lena, her assistant, technically, in reality, apprentice, a quiet storm in flats and neutral blouses. The only person who had ever really seen what Charlotte had been building. The message was short. Something's up. Floor 12 servers lagging. Dashboard froze. A minute later, Slack auto kicked everyone. Espresso machine just shut off. Weird, right? Charlotte didn't respond. She didn't have to. Lena knew. She always knew. That was the thing about building something from within. The structure might look stable on the outside. But inside, Charlotte had planted a heartbeat. And now that rhythm was rewriting everything. Inside Orion Core, confusion began to ripple. The CRM dashboard refused to load past the login screen. The analytics suite spat out graphs with missing axes. Someone on the product team shouted that their Jira board had rolled back to last month's data. One engineer claimed he saw Japanese characters flash across the terminal before his system went dark. No alerts were triggered, no firewalls lit up, nothing was attacked, because nothing had been breached. They weren't under siege. They were drowning in a copy. Charlotte hadn't crashed the system. She'd cloned it. And now, every department was navigating a perfectly simulated environment, except the data was dust. The code hollow. The logic recursive. They weren't working. They were watching ghosts perform. Colin Merrick, COO, blazer perpetually unbuttoned, smile surgically professional, was in the middle of a leadership Zoom when his screen glitched. He paused, reconnected, laughed it off. 2 minutes later, his email wouldn't send. His calendar reloaded and showed meetings he didn't schedule. His desktop background was replaced with a black screen and a blinking underscore. That's when he stood up. 10 minutes later, he burst into Charlotte's now empty office. The scent of lemon polish and old espresso still lingered. The chair was slightly turned. The desk drawers partially open. A photo of her son was gone. The pawn was gone. The legacy? Still there. In the walls. In the wires. Colin slammed the desk. What the hell did she do? Lena watched from the hallway. She didn't speak. She just stepped aside. Back on the street, Charlotte sat on a bench behind an old courthouse, shaded by a crooked maple tree. The wind rolled in off the bay, sharp. Familiar. Her phone buzzed again. Shared folder activity. MIRRORWATCH sync initialized. She smiled. Just a little. Footsteps approached. Measured. Confident. Lena. She sat beside Charlotte in silence. No questions. Just presence. She held her tablet like a shield. ID badge still clipped to her pocket. She looked like a normal assistant. That was her power. You accessed Mirror Watch? Charlotte asked softly. Just monitoring. Not triggering. Good girl. They didn't talk about Sentinel Loop. Or the fact that by now, half the core services of Orion Core were responding to shadow code, recursive structures Charlotte had built as early as 2020. When Colin first slashed her budget without reason. They didn't need to speak about the new heartbeat either. Lena already understood. The system wasn't failing. It was evolving. Quietly. Ruthlessly. Perfectly. Then Lena slipped something into Charlotte's bag. A thumb drive. Failsafe. She whispered. Mirror Watch variant. Charlotte didn't ask what it did. She trusted Lena, and that, more than any line of code, was the real foundation. As Lena walked away, Charlotte watched her disappear into the crowd. She didn't look back. That was the difference between Lena and the others. The others followed rules. Lena followed signals. Charlotte leaned back on the bench. Her fingers tightened around the pawn in her coat pocket. That's when the real storm began. Inside OrionCore's 12th floor server hub, all green lights flickered red. Dashboards blinked. Login credentials recycled into null strings. Email queues dumped themselves into unsorted piles. The espresso machine, Colin's $12 Italian import, spit out hot air. Hissed. And died. Still, no alarms. Because alarms weren't wired into what Charlotte built. They were wired into what Colin thought he controlled. Charlotte closed her eyes for a breath. Just one. Not out of exhaustion. Out of completion. She hadn't left a bomb. She'd left a mirror, and now they were watching themselves unravel. The first time Charlotte realized that systems don't collapse from impact, but from erosion. She was 35, working overtime on a dying analytics stack in a company that no longer remembered her name. Back then, she believed the fix was louder meetings, better memos, tighter governance. She thought good architecture needed good leadership. She was wrong. What it needed was vision, and the ability to see when the hands steering the wheel were blindfolded. So when the red lights began flickering across OrionCore's mirrored systems, she didn't celebrate. She observed. From her bench beneath the leaning tree, her phone showed real-time telemetry, CPU spikes in dead servers, recursive echo logs from the CRM backend, a ghost version of Slack pinging phantom teams who didn't exist anymore. None of it looked broken. Everything looked functional. That was the genius of Sentinel Loop. It didn't fight the system. It became the system, until even the saboteur couldn't tell the difference. Inside the building, Colin Merrick paced in circles. His usual cocky rhythm was gone. He barked at legal, shouted at IT, demanded logs, reports, anything, but nothing stuck. The diagnostics were perfect, which was exactly the problem. We've lost control of perception, the new lead engineer whispered. But Colin didn't hear him. Not really, because Colin was still thinking like a boss, not a builder, still believing that yelling louder would realign the world. Charlotte had stopped thinking like that years ago. Her perspective had shifted the day she realized she wasn't just maintaining infrastructure, she was quietly designing the nervous system of every product. Every report, every boardroom insight Colin pretended to understand. She hadn't needed approval, she had needed time, and time was exactly what corporate blindness gave her. Over the past 4 years, every decision that made her invisible had also made her infinite. Each project she was strategically removed from gave her license to build her own mirrored version, lighter, smarter, invisible. At first, Sentinel Loop had been a whisper, just a diagnostic tool running parallel to the core stack. Then came the heartbeat protocol, micro pulses that lifted the copy higher while pushing the original down, a few layers at a time. Now, Sentinel Loop wasn't a backup. It was the default, and no one even noticed. That was the moment Charlotte's purpose shifted. She wasn't defending her job anymore. She was rewriting her place in the system, not as a contributor, but as the ghost protocol that redefined ownership. She had seen the writing on the wall months ago, hidden inside procurement reports, back-end flags, and an oddly titled folder. Strategic Succession Planning, Phase 3. She almost didn't open it. Almost. What she found wasn't a restructuring plan. It was a purge, a deliberate roadmap to eliminate non-scalable leadership. The definition of non-scalable: women over 45, women like Charlotte, women who'd carried legacy systems on their backs for a decade while smiling through budget cuts, credit theft, and boardroom invisibility. There were graphs, the graphs, attrition goals, age breakdowns, anonymous titles, but she knew them all. Renee in compliance, Marta in vendor strategy, Laia in data ops, names replaced with roles, loyalty reduced to a cost center. And at the bottom of the document, a handwritten comment: they're candles from a past era. Let's blow them out while the lights are still on. Initialed, CM, Colin Merrick. That line burned through Charlotte's chest like acid. Not because it was cruel. Because it was strategic. Misogyny wrapped in metrics. Sexism dressed as modernization. She didn't cry, didn't forward the memo, didn't scream. She watched. She prepared. And now, the lights were still on, but the walls were burning. Back under the tree, Charlotte's phone vibrated. Blocked number. She answered without speaking. A woman's voice came through, German accented. Clipped. Precise. Protocol activated? Yes, Charlotte said. Are you visible? Only if I want to be. Silence on the line. Then, you may need to consider extraction. Charlotte looked toward the river. The city was glowing like nothing had happened. But she could hear it, beneath the asphalt and glass. The foundation had shifted. They already escalated, Charlotte said. They just don't know it yet. Another pause. Do you have a name? Charlotte's lips curved. Umbra, she said. Latin. Shadow. The voice didn't respond, just clicked off. No confirmation, no farewell. Because in this world, when you finally see the whole system for what it is, you stop asking for permission. You become the rewrite. And Charlotte was no longer playing on their board. She was the board. It came at 8:01 p.m. Almost to the second. Charlotte was back in her apartment, lights low. Shoes off. A glass of water sweating slowly on the coffee table. The silence was comforting, not hollow. Outside, the city glowed like a circuit board, alive. But indifferent. Then her phone pinged. Encrypted message. Subject. Zai Jia Shu, reconnection. The sender? A relay address she'd only seen used once, during the 2021 typhoon in Osaka. When every other line of communication failed. She opened it. One sentence. System handshake broken. Still interested in collaboration? No logo. No signature. No performance fluff. Just precision. Charlotte didn't smile, but something in her posture shifted. This wasn't a courtesy check-in. This was recognition. A signal from the only client that mattered, not Orion Core. Not the board, not even the executives who'd ghosted her exit, but the system that saw her work for what it was. She typed a single word in response. Interested. 4 minutes later, a second message landed. This one had an attachment. Letter of intent. Company. Umbra Systems LLC. Term. 24-month migration contract. Clauses. Full autonomy on system architecture. Performance-based bonuses. No brand oversight. Direct signatory authorization. Charlotte opened the file. At the bottom, one line. Designated CTO, Charlotte Reed. She didn't hesitate. No second read. No revisions. No legal consult. She signed. Digitally. Cleanly. Legally. And just like that, Charlotte Reed was no longer a former employee. She was an independent system. Umbra Systems had been registered 6 months ago under a Delaware LLC, anonymous. Untraceable, wrapped in encrypted holding shells. And backed by a private IP escrow containing every major protocol she had written over the past 5 years. This wasn't improvisation. It was inevitability. Charlotte hadn't built a parachute. She'd built a new aircraft. One line of code at a time. And now, it was flying. Her laptop buzzed again. Another message. Sender. Tanaka, the head of international operations. The man who once told her, "You're the spine, not just the engineer." The only one who ever treated her like more than a resource. His message? We never relied on Orion Core. We relied on you. 7 words. Quiet. Atomic. Not a farewell. A beginning. Charlotte leaned back in her chair. The digital glow washed across her face. This was more than a win. This was a reset. For years, she'd watched clients get lured in by branding. Flashy decks. Promises of innovation delivered by people who couldn't even read deployment logs. But now? They were coming to her. 3 contracts in negotiation, 2 confirmed sign-ons. One was already a former Orion Core account. No marketing, no press, just quiet referrals. Because when chaos takes over, people don't run to the loudest voice. They run to the quietest expert. Charlotte stood and walked to the balcony. The night was still. The wind pressed against the glass towers. Distant sirens howled like echoes of another world, a world she no longer belonged to. Umbra Systems wouldn't have an office. Wouldn't have an org chart. No mission statement. No coffee budget. No legacy fat. Just a network of systems. Designed to heal broken architecture and rewire outdated empires. She'd already selected the core team, 3 women she'd trusted over the years. Not flashy, not noisy, but proven. Technicians, not performers. The ones who stayed late after everyone else went home. Not to show off, but to understand. Lena would handle ops. The others were shadows for now. Umbra didn't need to be seen. It just needed to function better than anything else in the field. And it would. Because it wasn't built on pitch decks. It was built on exile, memory, and unshakable resolve. Her phone buzzed again. This time, Lena. No words. Just a photo. The executive floor. Empty. On the carpet. A broken brass nameplate, Colin Merrick. COO, snapped clean through the middle. Next to it, a half-full coffee mug turned on its side, its contents bleeding into the cheap beige carpet like a quiet surrender. Charlotte didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. She closed her eyes, breathed in, not satisfaction, awareness. The storm was still gathering. But this time, it wasn't chasing her. It was clearing the sky ahead. It was just past midnight when Charlotte walked into the dim corner booth of a hotel lounge 5 blocks from OrionCore's crumbling headquarters. This place used to be neutral ground, where she'd met partners, soothed egos, pitched strategies no one else could make work. She remembered the way the lights dimmed just right, the way the bartender never asked questions. Tonight, she brought no presentations, no pitch, no smile, just a laptop, and ownership. The screen glowed with Sentinel Loop's final diagnostics, 94% saturation. Pulse stable, decoy systems still responding. They thought they'd regained control. They hadn't realized they were navigating a shadow. Charlotte sipped her water, staring at the live feed of OrionCore's system heartbeat. She didn't need to stay. She wasn't watching for failure. She was documenting the handoff. They weren't running her system anymore. They were being run by its ghost. She closed the laptop. Slow, deliberate, done. Later that night, back in her apartment, she took off the blazer she no longer needed to wear. She moved differently now, not careful, not defensive, confident, not because she was certain, but because she'd finally stopped asking for certainty. Charlotte Reed no longer needed validation. She'd rewritten her own value. She sat on the edge of her bed and pulled out the small stone pawn she had carried through it all. Not for revenge, not even for symbolism. She held it because it reminded her who she used to be, quiet, underestimated, stable, a piece no one watched until it reached the other side of the board. The pawn had made it. She'd promoted herself, not to a queen, but to something rarer, a designer of the game. The next morning, she stood on the balcony as the sun crept over the skyline. No trumpets, no headlines, just light, the kind of light that didn't beg to be seen, just existed. Confidently, her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Lena. It was Eli, her son. A call. She answered, and his familiar smirk filled the screen. Pixelated, half asleep, but unmistakable. "Mom, you're trending again." Charlotte laughed. Genuinely this time. "Oh, good trending or firestorm trending?" He grinned. "The kind that makes execs sweat." "So, terrifying trending." He nodded. "Exactly." They talked for 20 minutes about everything and nothing. His new CO, her new place. He asked, carefully, if she was okay. She didn't lie. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "But I'm not angry anymore." "You're not supposed to be. You're just supposed to keep building." She smiled. He always had a way of reducing the most complex truths into one sentence. She had taught him that. Later that day, Lena sent a final sync report. 3 clients onboarded, 5 more in process, all inbound. No advertising, no messaging, just quiet migrations. Charlotte forwarded the report to no one. It was hers, all of it. That evening, she walked past the old bench by the river. 6 years ago, she'd sat there in silence after being reassigned from her last role. The taste of betrayal still bitter in her mouth. But today, she didn't sit. She stood, strong, tall, watching the water carry everything away that no longer mattered. She didn't need to reclaim her place. She had built a new one. Umbra wasn't a rebellion. It wasn't revenge. It was a sanctuary for builders like her. The ones they called obsolete. Political, too intense, too blunt. The ones who told the truth before anyone was ready to hear it. And now, finally, the system had caught up to her. She checked her phone one last time. No alerts, no warnings. Only one encrypted message. From Lena. "They asked if we can scale." Charlotte paused, then typed, "We don't scale, we evolve." And that was it. The game was hers now. And for the first time in years, she felt it. Not power, not control, peace. It was 3:14 a.m. when the final message came through. Charlotte wasn't asleep. Sleep had become a suggestion, not a requirement, her mind still humming with momentum, purpose, direction. The screen lit up, secure line activated. She expected Lena, but it wasn't Lena this time. It was a code string, mirror watch. Initiating its final routine, a soft green flash rolled across her terminal like a breath. It meant one thing. The last fragment of Sentinel Loop had finished decoupling from OrionCore. The system that once claimed her, no longer held a single thread connected to her name. Charlotte stared at the screen. Calm, not triumphant. Clean, Resolved. She opened the final shell file. Raven Wake. A contingency protocol she had built in silence. Its function was not to destroy. It was to erase. Not them. Her. Every authorship tag. Every digital fingerprint. Every metadata line that tied her name to the infrastructure she'd constructed. She didn't want revenge. She wanted to vanish on her own terms. Because legacy wasn't the goal. Freedom was. She executed the file. Line after line scrolled through like a gentle snowfall. One by one, her identity disappeared from systems she'd designed, commits unattributed, logs anonymized, system authorship transferred to a null shadow token. Charlotte Reed had left the building. Digitally, structurally, permanently. She sat in the stillness afterward, watching the ripple fold in on itself like silk. For a moment, the world was quiet, and in that quiet, she breathed, not like someone finishing a fight, but like someone finally arriving. Later that morning, she stepped out onto the balcony of her new workspace, a renovated brownstone tucked behind a quiet university block. Its rooftop overlooked the skyline, the same city that once watched her be discarded. But now it watched her reconstruct. The air carried the bite of early fall, crisp but not cruel, the kind of weather that told the truth. Her phone buzzed. Lena again. No words this time, just a photo. A hallway, carpeted, executive floor. There, on the ground, Colin's brass nameplate split clean through the middle. Left behind like an artifact from a crumbled regime. Beside it, a tipped-over espresso cup bleeding into the carpet. Like even the machine had surrendered. Charlotte didn't smile. There was no satisfaction in watching small men collapse under systems they never understood. Because that wasn't the point. The point was that she was free. By noon, Umbra Systems had quietly onboarded its fifth client. No PR, no marketing blitz, just referrals, just trust. 2 of the clients had been Orion Core contracts. They had followed the code, followed the logic, followed her. Because in the end, no one trusts a brand. They trust the architect who held it together when no one was watching. At 6:22 p.m., Charlotte took her final meeting of the day, a secure video call with an infrastructure lead from a Fortune 200 company based in Berlin. He wore a tired suit, but his voice held a tremor she recognized, not fear, but relief. Relief that someone like her existed. "We don't need branding," he said. "We need stability. And someone who's lived through a system collapse." She met his eyes through the screen. "I don't fix systems," she said. "I replace them." He didn't flinch. He nodded. The deal was done in 7 minutes. That night, Charlotte returned to the Riverwalk. The bench was still there. Slightly crooked, weather-worn. 6 years ago, it had been her shelter after being silenced. Today, it was her witness. She didn't sit. She stood beside it, one hand resting on the backrest, the other holding the stone pawn, now smooth from years of wear. She turned it in her palm. Not as a keepsake, as a reminder. She had once been a pawn. Moved by others. Overlooked. Dismissed. But the truth of chess was this. The pawn has only one job, to keep moving forward. And once it reaches the other side, it changes everything. Charlotte Reed had reached the other side. And she wasn't going back. There comes a moment in every life, usually in silence, not in spotlight, when you realize you're no longer fighting for your seat at the table. You're designing the damn table. Charlotte Reed's story wasn't about vengeance or glory. It was about ownership, about understanding that when systems reject you, it's often because you no longer fit inside their outdated definitions of value. She didn't crumble when discarded. She recalibrated. She didn't scream when sidelined. She rewired. Her lesson was this: you don't need to burn bridges to escape. You build a better route. In a world that confuses loyalty with silence and innovation with youth, Charlotte proved that resilience is neither loud nor fashionable, it's strategic, intentional, and deeply personal. Being called redundant didn't erase her value. It revealed just how irreplaceable she truly was. Because systems can be copied, brands can be rebranded, but integrity cannot be cloned. When the world forgets your worth, remember to build anyway, quietly, purposefully, and when it's time, let them discover they were standing on the code you left behind. Whether you're 45 or 65, laid off or overlooked, your story isn't over. Reinvention doesn't require permission. In fact, the best transformations happen after someone else says, you're no longer needed. If you've ever been told you're too old to adapt, too experienced to evolve, or too direct to lead, you're not the problem. You're the prototype for what's next. Start your own system. Use your history as foundation, not baggage. Mentor someone in silence. Document your brilliance. Build shadows if you must, but never stop building. The world won't always reward your work, but it will notice your absence. And one day, the same system that erased your name may find itself running on the very architecture you left behind. Thank you for choosing to listen to this story among thousands of stories out there. Like and subscribe to continue listening to the latest stories.